Welcome to Casting Nets. I'm one of your hosts, Pastor Dave Rudat. I am here with my 7 deadly sins and the other puns ready to go. We're getting ready for Holy Week, so of course the pastors are not getting the sleep that they need and all of that other good stuff. And so here we are doing a show, having a conversation. I'm joined with Pastor Will Harley from St. John Maribel.
Hello, thank you.
Yeah, and there he is. And we are here doing a show on Adiaphora today. We didn't have anything in the description. We didn't have anything in the title, just bare bones. Let's talk about this subject together from the formula of Concord. Our focus will be on the solid declaration because there's a lot there, and the epitome is nice and summarized, but you might want some more flesh on those bones. So before we get there, though, we've got to do a disclaimer. So we disclaim everything that needs to be disclaimed in this podcast in a blanket fashion. You are joining in conversation between two pastors. So you are engaging in something that people think happens every day, every Sunday. And I think now you should be able to hear me correctly. It's not quite so echoey.
We're good.
Yeah,
I was all right.
You are engaging in something you think, or some people think, maybe not you think what some people think. What happens every Sunday is that pastors just get up there and talk. That's not what Pastor Will Harley and I do. We put a lot of thought in what we have to say on Sundays, but we don't put a lot of thought in what we say today. We're just speaking off the top of our heads. We are just having a conversation. We're welcoming you in and say, hey, let's have this conversation. Let's have a beginning of a conversation, not the end. So if we're talking off the top of our heads, that means we might change our minds. We might fine-tune what we're thinking. What comes out of our mouth might not be actually what we actually believe. We're just saying it because we're thinking out loud in front of you, and you're joining a conversation. So you are welcome to join that conversation with us. If you want to communicate with us, you can do that in person at Emmanuel Lutheran in Shirley. You'll find Pastor Dave Rudat there. That's myself. And if you want to talk with Pastor Will Harley, go to St. John in Maribel, and they've got lots of cool services coming up for Holy Week. Emmanuel is kind of having some services. We've got a Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, and Easter Sunday, and all that stuff. But you have plenty of opportunities to talk to us in person. You can email us at castingnetspod@gmail.com. You can go to our website, which is castingnetspod.org.
Welcome back to the show. We're glad to have you with us. As Pastor Rudat said, we are going to be looking at the topic of Adiaphora. And I think the topic, out of all of the topics, I think Adiaphora for pastors is almost something simple. And we're just like, yeah, we understand it. When it comes to the layperson or the person who's maybe not in the same circle conversations that we have, they're going to look at it and say, that's not so simple. This is like pinnacle. This affects me more than anything else. My case in point, like when we talked about communion and we're talking about, the body and blood of Christ, and it's in, with, and under the bread and the wine. And we're like, this is, and then we're like, the Catholic Church views it different. And the Protestant churches, the Reformed churches view it different. And we're real presence and they lack this. And everyone else is like, they have communion. Like to them, it's like they don't necessarily resonate with that conversation. When it comes to Adiaphora, all of a sudden, all of the bells and whistles come out, and people are ready to take their stands because this was Grandma's church, and Grandma had it done a certain way, and Grandpa enjoyed a certain thing, and we can't change that because this is sacrosanct. And so when we start talking about Adiaphora, it becomes this almost a battle now, because they're really bringing in, and I think they do a good job, they really bring in the layman into the conversation in the book of Concord and say, okay, what we've been talking about and the things that we've been really doing really do have their resonance in the pew, because there are certain things we can do and certain things we can't do, and here's the reason why and why we should do or not do. And so, starting the conversation, we there's a lot there, and try to make our way through it and not muddle it. Let's start with just a definition. I think that's the best way to go, is to say we have this word. It's called adiaphora. What does it mean? And to get that idea, paragraph 9 in our kind of our lesson here, or the documentation, so that'd be the solid declaration, is going to give us about as best of a definition, a working definition of adiaphora as you could get.
Yeah, can we do 8 first?
I will let you do 8.
Yeah. Regarding genuine adiaphora or matters of indifference, as explained before, we believe, teach, and confess the following: such ceremonies in and of themselves are not worship of God, nor any part of it. They must be properly distinguished from ceremonies that are, as it is written, in vain do they teach, worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. We believe, teach, and confess that the community of God in every place and every time has, according to its circumstances, the good, right, power, and authority to change and decrease and increase ceremonies that are truly adiaphora. They should do this thoughtfully, without giving offense, in an orderly and appropriate way, wherever it is considered most profitable, most beneficial, and best for good order, Christian discipline, and the church's edification. Yeah.
Very good. So what do we have here? We have really 2 comments that are being brought up that I think are good starting points for us for our conversation. The first is that everything is pretty much free in the church except to invent doctrine. That's kind of the main point. So doctrine, there's this thing, there's called doctrine, and then there's everything else. And you can't invent doctrine. Everything else is kind of Christian freedom. But you don't invent doctrine. So we have this distinction between an outward practice and what is good and proper for the church. And of course, the word should never change. The doctrine of the church should never change. We can call it the dogma of the church, the good teachings, the orthodox and sound teaching of the church. Now, how do you do that? That's the outward expression of that. And those should be done in good order. And those should be done in an orderly fashion to lift up the church and to benefit her in the best possible way. Now, there's categories to that, I think. I think there are categories you could talk about. You could talk about adiaphora in the worship space. You could talk about adiaphora in the assembly, like how do we assemble as a congregation. You probably could talk about adiaphora in the sense of what should a pastor wear or shouldn't a pastor wear? Should you have youth helping in certain ways? Should you have ushers? How many ushers? The cases can go on. Should you have decorations, paraments, whatever? Let's maybe talk a little bit about that, flesh out what we're meaning between these differences, if you would like.
Sure. And just as a preface for this, it is interesting for me. I was reading some history behind the Augsburg Interim and what happens afterwards, and you'd be fascinated to see just how much variety there was in the Reformation Church, and how this was not just like it's not like an issue of the Lord's Prayer, whether you use the traditional Lord's Prayer or you use the newer version of the Lord's Prayer, like something minor like that. There were people that were making comments to each other about, oh, these guys like elevate the hosts, and these guys don't do that at all, and so there's all these things where you go elevating the host. You say, well, can we just elevate the elements, as we're saying this is now the bread and wine. We're consecrating this. Yeah, you could do that in a way that is edifying for those people who are present. And you could also have someone look at that and go, oh, are you saying that this now has turned into something else? No, that's not what we're saying. We're just giving attention to these elements over here. So I think that's good to understand that to get past the worldview that, oh, the church was uniform at one time and now we've screwed it all up because we've added the new Lord's Prayer, or we've added, the new hymnal or something like that. I don't think there's a history there that exists where the church was uniform in its practices and worship.
Well, and I think this is where that second point comes in. So we have the 2 points of, okay, what is adiaphora? Adiaphora is not doctrine. Doctrine is unchanging, and adiaphora is something that flows for good order. What does the church need for the time? And the church can let things come and go. But I think part of that also is the fact that I think the reformers are looking ahead and saying the church must remain flexible. That the church has to remain flexible, but the truth must remain solid. And this is the struggle that I think we get when we start this conversation with Adiaphora, because we start becoming inflexible, and we start thinking like, how many folds on the shawl that goes on the cross during Lent? It has to have 3, and if it doesn't, it's like someone's going to have a heart attack, and Christ will never die for the sins of the world, and he'll never rise because there wasn't 3 folds on this cloth. But I think, and that's a hyperbole. I'm painting this, but it becomes that way, right? Where we start looking at the things the church does, and we start comparing them to other churches and say, well, my church does, your church doesn't. And we start saying, well, why doesn't mine? Are we wrong? Are we bad? Or why does yours do this? Are they wrong? Are they bad? And this is very, very difficult. Now, adding a little nuance to this to make it even more difficult for our listeners as we're trying to think of adiaphora is, what is good practice? So when we're talking about the flexibility of the church, and we want to say, okay, the church must be flexible to do things in good order and in good practice, that we want to, in a good conscience, do the things that are going to be the most beneficial for even the weakest of our members. What does that mean? So, I mean, you got to really start thinking and taking things apart, because here's a case in point. I'm going to throw this out here. Could you have, hypothetically, in your congregation, a young lady who, wants to serve her church, and you're like, you know what, she's very active. She would love to hand out bulletins. She would love to help collect the offering during the service. In fact, we have other young ladies that would love to hand out bulletins and help collect the offerings in the service. So would it be wrong to say, we're going to have young ladies be a part of the usher teams to hand out bulletins and collect the offering? And in one church, you might say, that's not a bad idea. That's all the ushers do. That's kind of their thing. And that's another way for the ladies to be involved in their church, to be visible and say hi and welcome. But let's say you're a part of a church that looks at that and says, well, that would be great. We would love to have our ladies do those things, but our ushers are responsible for ushering people out for Holy Communion, and are that first, I don't want to say line of defense, but that first section there where maybe they would have to stop somebody and say, I'm sorry, but maybe you would want to wait until you talk with the pastor before you receive. Is that a position that a lady should be in according to the doctrine of headship? Now,
before we get into all the particulars and the what about this situation and what about that, can we like go at ultimate, what's the principles behind it instead of rushing to the application?
Sure. I was giving an example.
Can we park that?
Yeah, you can park that and come back to it. But I was trying to give an example of why this is such an important topic, and how we have freedom, but yet the freedom still is kind of regulated.
Yeah.
And how it's regulated. But yes, we can come back and talk about whatever you'd like to talk about.
This is a conversation. This isn't organized. That's not what this is. I do like, I was reading over Romans 14 and 15, and part of the things that I'm struggling with when it comes to Adiaphora is the weak brother. How do you define a weak brother? And 1 Corinthians, what's the other one? 1 Corinthians 9 or 8. And for our listeners, the person sitting in the pew, because this is a very emotional issue, like whatever it is, whatever the issue is, you might have said, the women ushers, that's no big deal. But when I said the Lord's Prayer, then you were like, your hair's on the back of your neck. So it all depends on what practice is being talked about. and sometimes we can lose ourselves in the application and we forget the principle. And so anyway, what I do appreciate when reading through Paul is his consideration for the weak, but then he also defines it in terms of not just in terms of you, like yourself, like what is your worldview when you're viewing with someone who you disagree with? Are you judging them? Are you looking down on them? Or are you fully convinced in your own mind, and are you completely okay with somebody else who's fully convinced in their own mind for whatever it is? Are you okay with them coexisting in the same space? And then when you're dealing with someone who is weak, what's the end goal? Is it to bow before them, or are you trying to build them up? Is this all part of your strategy to build them up or to acquiesce to someone who gets easily offended? So like for me, it was fascinating just to look at that question, because you're wrestling with, if someone takes offense at something that you do, whether it's the Lord's Prayer, whatever the example is,
Sure.
You go, why am I going to change my course of action? If I've determined that this is beneficial and profitable and best for good order, and this is a good thing for the church, and someone doesn't like it, why don't they like it? And that requires us to have more than just they're stupid question, or they don't have the knowledge question, but what exactly is going on here? Are they weak because they're new to the faith? Are they weak because they are very strong in their convictions and they are not willing to bend? Does that make them weak because they're not willing to see that the gospel is the most important thing?
Well, that's an interesting question.
Go ahead. Good.
And I
have
think
a lot to. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's an interesting question that you propose, because I think, and you kind of said it in the monologue, which is good.
I'm monologuing today.
No, it's fine. But I think you said it though. Like when it comes to Adiaphora, a lot of Adiaphora is personal preference. And it's an unwillingness to be flexible, because flexibility seems to be a sign of weakness. And flexibility seems to be a sign of surrender. And people don't like to surrender the things that they cherish. And I understand that. I think, like you're saying, there has to be a conversation. Why do you go to the Lord's Prayer? You had said, because I think that's a big battleground for many people. I have shut-ins that will say, Pastor, we're going to say the Lord's Prayer, but it's going to be the old-fashioned Lord's Prayer. I mean, that's like, it's going to be that. And I think the question that you can ask is why? And if they say it's because this is what I memorized and it is near and dear to my heart, or this is, as I say it, this is how it's always going to come out. Okay, I can maybe understand that. If they say this is the only way the Lord's Prayer can be said, I'm probably going to be less understanding, because, that is, you're drawing a line in the sand and saying everybody else who prays it in a modern way is wrong because they didn't say it in your way. And so I think there's that. I like the idea of there needs to be the conversation. Why are you doing the things that you're doing? But I think that's also where the church is always fallen short, because the church has always fallen short on one side or the other. One, the pastor comes in, says, what are the customs of the church? This is what we're going to do, and this is what we always do. And then they say, well, why do we do this? And it was like, pastor's like, I don't know, I came here and this is what you did. Yeah. And that they just do it. I think, and then there's others who ride that razor's edge that say, we've got to be changing everything, and we got to be innovative, and we've got to be stretching, and we've got to be to the point where they're losing maybe the cohesion of those other people who may be weaker in faith. And I haven't been brought to the understanding that it's okay to do those things. And so I think there's a danger on both sides here of how Adiaphora plays out. And I think the church has done a very poor job sometimes in explaining, like, why do we have the traditions we have? Why do we do the things that we do?
Yeah. And are we willing to have a conversation that says we're okay with changing our mind after that evaluation?
Sure.
And like you said, like this is, we're not in a culture where innovation, what would you say, personal preferences are things that are willing to change. Because if you're saying this is my personal preference and you change the personal preference, now you're getting into rights. And this is my right to do it this way. Yeah. And I'm in this country, and this is, I have a right to do this, and I have a right to do that. Where I appreciate Paul's conversation in Romans 14 and 15, and the reformers here in the book of Concord, where they're talking about church edification. This is the church deciding, this is something that's gonna be beneficial for the church. We've examined it, we looked it over. It's not about personal preferences. It's about how can we build up the church of God.
Yeah. I also think that we should add into this conversation some of the reason why maybe our people don't necessarily hear the bat. I think Adiaphora is a very important thing. And when you start bringing it down to personal preferences and things like that, they start resonating with that more. Our listeners start resonating with that more. But I honestly think that the mobility of the church today, I should say the mobility of the people of the church today, removes sometimes some of these Adiaphora questions, because more people will, I should say, less people find themselves desiring to talk with their leadership and talk with the pastor, and more of, I'm going to take my toys and I'm going to pack them all up and I'm going to go find a sandbox that plays the way I want to play, to the rules I want to play it. And there's so many opportunities for them that were not there and afforded them during the time of the writing of the Solid Declaration. So when they were writing the Solid Declaration, or when Paul was even writing to the Romans, you had a church in Rome. You had a Christian church in Rome, and you're like, I don't like the way that they're playing. You're not going to travel to Corinth every Sunday to go to church. That wasn't going to happen. You're in Rome, and this, so you got to learn to play in the sandbox together, and we got to learn to do this well. In the times of the reformers, there wasn't the Lutheran church every other block. I mean, sometimes you have, think about it. We have Wells congregations, like 2 Wells congregations in a town 5 miles apart. And you're like, when did they start? How did they start? Well, one pastor came in and did a thing and they didn't like it. And so they wanted it wasn't a doctrinal thing. It was just an Adiaphora thing. And half the people went and started a new congregation down the street. And then they called another pastor who was also Wells, who just didn't do that thing. And they now they're pulpit exchanging during Lent. This is some of the ridiculousness, I think, that comes into danger in itself, but it's the ridiculousness that comes from Adiaphora when it's not being talked about, like you said. And I think in ages past, when churches were not so far flung and mobility was restricted, these conversations had to be had sooner than they are now, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think we're in the age of the tyranny of the weak. Someone does there's a danger between tyranny of the weak and the danger of the tyranny of the strong. So there's a happy medium in the middle somewhere.
We have to have a shirt. We have to have a shirt that says that, like
what?
Something on the back, like just, we're in the age of the tyranny of the weak. Like, have a shirt, and right, and then on the bottom, age of the tyranny of the strong, and then right in the middle, the Lutheran middle.
Yeah, because I like how, it helps me to read all of and it will help you to read all of Romans 14, 15. I'm sorry, we're not even going through the book of Concord here, but because they're just looking at it from their perspective as, these are the leaders in the church. We are going to be considerate for those who are weak. And we are also going to do things that are going to be for the church's edification. So that might mean that some of the weak is going to not be happy about this. And we're going to do things in the midst of an atmosphere where the government was oppressing the church. So that's a completely different scenario than what we are dealing with in America, although we like to say we're always being persecuted. Different scenario. So we're the whole section of Romans 14 and 15 talks about the weak, and our worldview when we're looking at the weak. Why is it that they're objecting? Maybe it's someone who is new to the faith. Maybe it's someone who struggles with their conscience bothers them about a lot of things, and you're like, I just don't want to. I don't want their conscience to get upset over another thing, because they're a conscience that needs the Lord's Supper a lot, because they just realize how much they are a sinner, and then they don't want to sin anymore, and then that's truly a weak person. We oftentimes put a category of a weak person as someone who's like, I don't want to, right? I don't want to. I don't want to do this, or that offends me, or that's not the way it's been done, and never being open to the conversation, never being open to the idea that you could do things differently.
Well, and I think I would throw into the mix here, not only the doing things differently, but I would say the style of the way we do things. I think that in many cases and in many times, people, even pastors, craft their sermons. Coming back to this idea of the tyranny of the weak, I suppose, they craft their sermons for the lowest, I'm going to say the lowest common denominator in their congregation. In other words, they're looking out and they're saying, would the person who, I know so-and-so who just came to faith, I know so-and-so who's struggling with this, would they understand that? And sometimes they pull back from a deeper thought in the sermon so that they can make the point clear to that one person or that group of people. And I know that there are others in the congregation who sometimes are like, I don't get the depth I want, right? And they'll ask questions. I know I've had it here too sometimes. Well, Pastor, why isn't there maybe the depth that I'm looking for? That depth, I will tell them, that's in Bible study. Come to Bible study and we'll get into that depth. And I try to explain, I'm trying to bring those who are not at your level up to your level, and that takes time, and they're afraid to come to Bible study because it's at your level. And so they come to church, which is amazing because they're going to get all the strength they need, and then we're going to try to build them up. But sometimes, like you said, that's a hard pill to swallow. That's a hard pill to swallow, because there's people that look at it and say, well, I want my growth too. And I want someone to cater to my needs too. And I already understand that, and I want something deeper. And they don't see it as Adiaphora to be able to say, we're preaching the truth. The truth is still there. And to be humble like Luther and say the simple truth of the small catechism is worth preserving, and I still got to go back and read it every day because I forget it every day. So I think there's these dangers that are played there. Thanks for bringing in scripture. I mean, what is that? This is supposed to be the solid declaration. No,
stop that, Dave. Yeah,
it's fine. No, it's good to make those connections because, of course, this is the scriptures do talk about weak brothers and sisters and highlight how do we do this Adiaphora thing, and how do we try to work our way through it. So
do we want to talk a little bit about government's role and what is the role in Adiaphora when there's like that paragraph 10, especially in their situation? Do I want to open that can of worms? Do you want to open that can of worms?
So I would open the can of worms and just say this: neutral things stop being neutral when they're forced, or when there's falsehood. And so that'll be our introduction into this can of worms. And here's what I mean by that. Everything is in Christian freedom except for doctrine. Doctrine is doctrine. That is God's word to us for our edification and for our spiritual well-being. Everything else we can do, as long as it's in good order and flowing from that, we have freedom to do. Now, that changes when someone now tells you must do things a certain way, and if you don't do them, then you're wrong. Now those free things aren't free anymore, and so you might have to take the stand on the opposite way. I don't have the paragraph, but the quote is, I had it up here because I wrote it down. Okay. Under the title and excuse of outward adiaphora, things are proposed that are in principle contrary to God's word. These ceremonies are not to be regarded as adiaphora. Was that earlier or later into the text? I'm asking you to read my mind, and I
That's
can't.
paragraph 5.
That was paragraph. So it was earlier.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I have it underlined. So we normally, just to let you in, we normally like go through this together beforehand, and we just said in Lent we're giving that up. We're giving up, things we both like, and this we're doing. And it's good. It's a good conversation because we are.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be meta about this like taking a step back here, but we're paragraph 5. Let me give you that.
You're being meta.
I'm being meta. Breaking the fourth wall. I don't really.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, this is the paragraph you read, right? Under the title and excuse.
Yep. Yeah.
It must be avoided things.
Yeah, that's right there. In similar way, in such a situation, ceremonies should not be regarded as genuine free adiaphora, but matters of indifference. This is because they make a show or pretend that our religion or that of the papists are not far apart in order to avoid persecution, or they pretend that the papist ceremonies are not at least highly offensive to us. So now we have someone stepping in and they're saying, okay, do these things because we want order, we want peace, we want everyone to get along. And at that point, we have to say, I can't do those things.
In history, that's, with the Prussian Union trying to unify the Reformed and the Lutherans, that upset the Lutherans because they're like, your worship now must be harmonious with the Reformed so that a Reform can come in and take the Lord's Supper and not have to deal with this whole is question and those kinds of things. And then it also, in American history in World War I, wherein the government said to our Lutheran pastors, you must preach from your pulpits about war bonds and encourage your members from the pulpit to buy war bonds, and otherwise these things are going to happen to you. And our Lutheran churches stood up to that and says, no, this is not what we're going to do.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people will make the line from this to COVID, and I don't think this is the same thing as COVID when the government has said churches stop worshiping publicly, because we could still worship, we could still be the church, we could still receive the Lord's Supper. That they weren't telling us not to do things, they weren't telling us to preach things from pulpits. It just was inconvenient, and it was a lot of pain. And
I think that is the perfect, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that is the perfect illustration of when Adiaphora went the opposite way. And the church had a knee-jerk reaction, and a lot of rebellion, really, when it should have had the opportunity to practice its truly greatest gift, which is its flexibility. And I think that's where I think that was a perfect illustration where how many pastors, and I'll throw it on the backs of pastors, all across the spectrum, felt as if I am being limited, I am being stifled. The truth is being sequestered. They thought it was a doctrinal issue. And how many times did, you have to go back, what doctrine? What doctrine were they, well, we can't, that we're not being allowed to gather. Sure you are. No, we're not. In a different way. You can still gather in a different way. You found a way to do it. I'm for those of you who maybe don't remember the conversations from way back when, you can go back when we were still doing the podcast and we were talking about these things. So go to the COVID
Boundwell. Is that the Boundwell one? Or
yeah, it might have been. But okay. One of the ways that your congregation so beautifully kind of morphed into its flexibility in this was you had a shortwave radio did you have the shortwave radio? Or no, you did the
FM station.
Broadcast it right into the parking lot. So you had people coming and you stood at the door and you're like, okay, everyone roll down your windows and say hi. And it's like you had the flexibility of the church to do this and still be safe for what the knowledge we had, and yet still give the gifts that God gives. We did drive-by communion. Everyone stayed in the car. I had a mask on. I had gloves on. And we had a stereo there.
Right. And regardless, like at the time when you're going through it, we're thinking this is we can still be our church and we can still show submission to government. And I think that was a key thing too, where we're living in a world that doesn't want to submit to anybody. As long as I agree with it, I'll submit to it. But if I don't agree to it, don't force me to eat vegetables. I mean, I'll go to the salad bar and I'll eat whatever I want off that salad bar. But if you want me actually to eat vegetables, no, thank you. We'll submit to a government as long as it does everything we want. And then, so it was, like you said, it was a perfect example for the church to show its versatility and to say that the church is here. The church is the people sharing the gospel with one another, and we were still able to share the means of grace. We were still able to preach what we were allowed to preach. Now, there were some instances where there was a government overreach. I'm not saying that the government was
Sure.
Without fault, and so on and so forth.
Did that affect every church? No.
Yeah.
And for the churches that it affected, their battle was different, and the decisions that they had to make were different. And I think that's the part that we fail to realize is we looked at the scenario where, oh, but look at what they did, let's say in California or what they did in Michigan. And you're like, look at that. But is that Wisconsin? Did Wisconsin do that? Well, no. Then that doesn't apply to you. And this is where Adiaphora also
Oh, there you go. That's a good
has
point.
its said, because their battle was different than your battle.
Your battle, yeah.
And so to them, yes, what you are doing wasn't Adiaphora. To them, it was something else because they were being told something else, and something else was being demanded of them.
Awesome.
In
Yeah,
your
exactly.
in your stand, it wasn't that way, and so your battle is different. And that's so the way that Adiaphora is treated and the way that you present yourself is going to be different.
Yeah, I like how Paul talks about that the balance between, and again, I'm going back to Romans instead of
That's
Book of
okay.
Concord, but how Paul talks about oh boy, I lost my train of thought. I did. I lost my train of thought. Let's move on. Maybe it'll come back to me.
And that's the point. So the point is that, our battles are different, and we stand united as the church to say it's okay that in one place the church might have to act a different way and might have to gather in a different way. And that's all right. And that's perfectly fine.
Yeah. Oh, there it is. The concept of judging the other person, somebody who's doing something differently. Don't watch yourself so you're not judging. Each one should be fully convinced in their own mind. And so that means that you can sit there and go, you're going to apply it differently than I am going to apply. And so, yeah, that's the thing.
Here's another little sticky wicket to throw in there, and I'm going to throw into all of this just a key word of reverence. I've heard that one thrown around where people look, this church is doing XYZ and it's not reverent. And if you really revere God's word, you revere his gifts, you're going to do it this way. And it's like, that's a really slippery slope. As to who is to say what is reverent and what is not. Who's to say? Should we be quote unquote reverent like the prophets, falling down on our faces and prostrate? Whenever we read or hear or come in contact with the word of the Lord, should we? And I know there's some Christian congregations that do such things. What is the idea of reverent? And I think that comes into Adiaphora too. That ability to be able to just filter through what is the principle that God is saying. This is God's word. These things do not change. And then how are they reflected in the life of the church to its best effect, for good order, for reducing the amount of tension for those who are truly weak and they don't know, and for those who are stronger and maybe know and want more, and for those in between that are like, I'm inflexible and I just want to stay the course. And how do we do this well? And this is where I think the reformers are trying to find their way too. as they have an opportunity, as they continue to I mean, there's a lot in here. There's negative things. A lot of it comes back down to when the government is forcing them, when the papists are forcing them. They're going to take their stands. It's no longer Adiaphora, even if it might have been Adiaphora to begin with. When someone says you must, then you can't, and therefore it becomes an issue that you have to debate. What else you got? Any other things you want to pull in from
from the Bible instead of the Book of Concord? Dave, I read the Book of Concord. I don't know. I didn't know that there was extra credit involved. So we talked about worship. We talked about assembly. The church getting together and doing its thing. Adiaphora in terms of, and I think we spent a lot of time there because, like you said at the very beginning, this is an issue that probably does not affect pastors as much as it does a layperson, because a layperson comes to worship and they are making a transference from the God that they worship to the place that they worship and the way that they worship. And for us as pastors, usually that's, maybe I shouldn't be speaking for all pastors, but at least for me, I go into a different congregation and they have different traditions and customs, and that's great. And I go to a pastor's conference and they have different traditions and customs, and I go, that's great. And so I'm used to variety, whereas the person sitting in the pew who goes to the same place for a long period of time may not be used to that. And so I like that comment at the very end of the section where disagreement in fasting does not destroy agreement in faith, and how we're practicing ourselves and conducting ourselves and assembling and things of that nature. I think you were thinking of more than just church assembly. Were you thinking of how the church does its stuff?
No, I mean, it is about church assembly. It's about how we put ourselves together and how we perform ourselves at a church, but it's also how we do things outside in the public. And I think I think there are different churches that do different things, and we say good, bad, and different. And sometimes we say, well, the way we have done things must be the way that we always do things, and it's really adiaphora, and it's just a matter of again, coming back down to the flexibility of the church within the word and what is prohibited and what is not. I think we talked about kind of going forward a little bit. We did talk about how adiaphora no longer becomes adiaphora when the confession is under pressure. And I think that is an important place for us to maybe spend a little bit of time in the simple fact that not everything is pushing against your confession, even when we think it is. Like you didn't sing from my hymnal anymore because the hymnal's changed. That's not a confession thing. That's it's not. It's a personal thing, and I value that. It's not a confession thing. The Lord's Prayer, which you had brought up, how you say the Lord's Prayer, that's not a confession thing. That's a That's a different thing. Now, here is a confession thing. You sit down with somebody that says the only divinely inspired word of God is the King James. That is a confession thing. That then you might say, yeah, I'm not going to use the King James. Well, why wouldn't you use the King James? Because you said it is the only divinely inspired word of God, and I'm going to show you it's not, right?
Sure.
And so that would be a confession thing.
Or water, how much water to use.
Absolutely. Do you dunk them?
Do you dunk them? Sure, we can dunk them. Well, the only valid baptism are ones we're dunk. No, we'll just splash.
Right.
We're okay with splashing.
Right. And that's kind of brought up paragraph 14, if we wanted to bring it back into the solid declaration. Paragraph 14 brings up that where they're kind of on this role of how does Paul deal with circumcision and things of that nature. And paragraph 14 kind of gives us this idea of when the confession is under fire, right? It's no longer adiaphora. So if you want to read that for us. Yeah.
This case is no longer a question about outward matters of indifference, which in their nature and essence are free. They cannot produce a command or prohibition that they must or must not be used. The case presented by Paul is a question in the first place about the outstanding article of our Christian faith. For the apostle testifies, so that the truth of the gospel might be preserved for you. The gospel is obscured and perverted by such compulsion or command, because such adiaphora are publicly required for the approval of false doctrine, superstition, and idolatry, and for the suppression of pure doctrine and Christian liberty, or at least are abused for this purpose by the adversaries, and are viewed this way.
Yeah. So again, if all of a sudden your confession is becoming under fire, right? What is the truth of God and what is being presented, and that becomes under fire, now there is no adiaphora in its response. There is no, well, we agree to disagree, or you do this and I'll do that. It's no, now we have to be more clear and we have to be more definitive. Which leads then, of course, because after the controversy is handled, you go through that generation of people who were under that controversy, and now it's like, this is what we do. And it then becomes, well, we have to do it. Why? Because we fought that battle, and we forget to put the guns down when we're done firing them. So that's kind of where I would go with that.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Like, once the battle's, like, the question of adiaphora is always a generation, should be revisited every generation.
Should.
And it isn't. And because we say, well, this is for good order, and this is for edification. But if it's no longer edifying, if it's just a thing you're doing and it's not edifying, or maybe by itself it doesn't edify. Maybe the thing does edify. For example, using a version of the Lord's Prayer, it does edify. You might say, well, this is a good thing that we do. Why we put the Lord's Prayer in there, why we put the creeds in there, and things of that nature.
Yeah.
I was thinking of, my wandering brain was thinking of the flags in the front of church. You know how the Lutherans were accused of being World War I, and then we were like, okay, we're going to put an American flag because you're coming to German worship services and you're hearing German all over the place. You're hearing German from the pulpit, and you can't understand what he's saying, and he sounds like he's for Germany in World War I. And so the Lutherans said, okay, fine, we'll be flexible. We'll put a flag up there. We don't need a flag, but it's for our edification, for the building up of the church. Yep. The government never told them to put a flag up there. The government was just accusing the German Lutherans of sedition. That's all.
Well, and I think nowadays, if you took the flag out of there, people would say you're not being patriotic. And I think so. I think it's one of those things where we had it there because we felt it was in good order to show that we were not standing in solidarity with a national enemy. I think that was a appropriate use. But again, now it's become one of those things where we could revisit and say, should there be any flags up there? What's the purpose? And if they're like, well, that's because we're showing our national solidarity. Do we have to? Is that part of the thing that we have to do anymore, is to show that type of solidarity? Yeah, and we might. I'm not saying it's gone away completely. I don't know. But that's one of those places where we ask the question, right? And that's where we revisit those things and say, the way we've been doing things, yeah, it's maybe gone on and we've been well, but is it edifying? Is this still good practice for us to do? And maybe we need to revisit something.
And yeah, right. Yeah. I do like going back to paragraph 9, the one that we started with. Like, it gives you more than one thing to consider. Is it if we can increase or change? We should do so in an orderly and appropriate way without giving offense. So it's kind of like not change just for the sake of change, or without careful instruction or careful examination of why we do what we do, and having a conversation. Why do you do this? And when you discover it's not the reason that you think it's the reason, maybe it's a good reason why they have it, and you never asked a question. You've just been wondering why do they do what they do.
Absolutely.
And so you have all of these things to consider, not just like good order. Good order must be the thing that we stand up, or it must always be about not giving offense. No. Well, we can also consider, is this thing profitable? Is this thing edifying for the church at large?
And I think maybe...
And the church in that space, I should say.
Yeah, and I think maybe because I think we've hit all the topics, maybe to kind of bring it full circle. The reality is that what brings the church together is not the things of Adiaphora.
That's a good point.
what brings the church together are not, oh, do we do the same things? Do we worship the same way? Do we have the same festival dates? Whatever. It's the doctrine, the truth of Christ, the gospel. It's the freedom that is given through that gospel that unifies us. It is not the practices. So if your church, dear brother, does something different, it's okay. It's okay. Because we believe in the same Christ, and we are holding fast to his same truths. Now, if we aren't holding to those same truths, then yes, there's no unifying thing there. Even if you're doing the same thing. So if you have a Catholic church or a Catholic mass that looks very similar to a Lutheran service, and you're like, oh, but they look the same, they're not unified because they're different in doctrine, right? But if you have two Lutheran churches, and I'm going to just use the two Lutheran churches, and one is got a band up there and they're jamming and they're singing praises, and you're there and your organ is blaring and it's shaking the rafters with an organ, you're still unified in one doctrine. You're unified in one faith, in one understanding of the scriptures as it's been presented to us. And it's okay, because the unification comes in Christ, not in the stuff you do.
Yeah, I agree. It's an excellent point. Comes in the word, not in practice. It's always good for us to be looking at Adiaphora and also looking at our own selves and our views of Adiaphora, because it is so easy to slip into, I like what I like, and what I like should be the way it's done. And they do it differently, and I don't like that, so therefore it should be done the way that I like it. Or, people who do things differently have this motive for doing the thing differently, and you are not having a conversation with them as to why they're doing what they're doing. You aren't letting them be convinced in their own mind. They must be convinced in your own mind. They have to convince you of why they did what they did. And so the Apostle Paul's words fall flat of each one should consider what's in their own mind. Each one should be doing the work, and then each one looking at, okay, I trust that you've actually thought this through. Yeah. And this is for the building up of the church. So every generation, I think, needs to revisit why it does what it does. And that can be a very healthy thing, because you are recognizing your own prejudices. You're recognizing that what you've been given isn't always just tradition for the sake of tradition. Maybe something you've been given is something that's very valuable and meaningful that hasn't been taught to you. So many times, in children's devotions, where you start talking about the maybe it's the stained glass, or maybe it's the pyramids, or maybe you're looking at why does a pastor wear this, and why is this over here, and people go away and go, oh, I never knew that. This is really kind of neat. Yeah, it's like, yeah, this is a good thing for the church to do, to look at what it does and say, this is something that builds up because of whatever reason. Ultimately, what's going to build us all up is the gospel. And in these conversations of Adiaphora, the gospel needs to be something in there. Why are we doing what we're doing? Is this advancing the gospel? Is this bringing the gospel to God's people or to people in the community? Let's try to do that.
And then take everything that Pastor Rudot says, just in that whole entire section, and then do what we did not do. Go back and read the Solid Declaration. And you will be well suited to serve your congregation in the very best way going forward in looking at this. That's it for the day. I mean, I don't know how better we can say it is to say amen.
What was that? Oh, that's still haven't got the lightsabers to work.
Well, welcome to the post show.
Welcome to the post show. Everything falls apart here. Any comments from Facebook today?
No comments from Facebook, so we did a great job.
We
Everybody
did,
was,
yeah.
was
Basically,
edified. The church was built up, grounded securely in the word. No, it was good. For our listeners, just so we get it out of the way and we kind of let you know, we are not going to be having a show next Thursday because we are, I shouldn't say we're having a live show next Thursday because it's in the middle of Holy Week. My prayer for you, and I'm sure Pastor Rudot's prayer for you as well, is that you have a very blessed Holy Week. Crying out, Hosanna, save us, Lord, as you celebrate Palm Sunday and then look at this wonderful Lord who serves not only his disciples but his church there on Holy Thursday, and then gather at the foot of the cross. Don't run like the other disciples. Gather like good John did with the ladies, and see your Savior bleed for you as he bleeds all over you, make you whiter than snow, and then join the ladies again at the open tomb and maybe race with Peter and John when they hear the news, and be amazed that he has risen for you. So do that next week. That's better than listening to anything we could come up with.
I do like in the whole story of Holy Week, the role of the ladies just taking it in, and like they don't understand, but yet they're there. They're taking it in, and the disciples probably maybe it was a situation where the ladies did not feel threatened, that their life was in danger. I don't know, but it was just like, to me, I was thinking about that last night because we read the story of the ladies standing there across from the tomb, watching them wrap Jesus in the cloth, and of course, thinking to themselves, they're doing it wrong. They should have done it this way. I can't believe they're only
right.
right. They're like, what are you doing? It's like, and they're just sitting there, and out of respect for Nicodemus and for Joseph of Arimathea, but yet they recognize that the job is left undone, and but then they are there, and they are the all of the unlikely witnesses of the resurrection, the enemies of Jesus, being the ultimate witnesses of the resurrection. This guy said he was going to raise in 3 days, so let's make sure that doesn't happen. And then God laughs in their face by sending an angel that sits on a stone. And
well, I don't want to cut the post show short, but I have someone who would like to talk with me in the office. And so thank you for listening. And I pray that your Holy Week is great. Pastor Rudot, pray your Holy Week is a blessing to you and your family and others. And